Hey everybody, it's time for another fabulous chapter of the Abarat. We are on chapter 16, which is called The Universal Eye. Carrion had no love of things Mexican. On the island of Payan, where it was always 3 o'clock in the morning, Rojo Pixler had built Mexico City, his so-called city of light and laughter. It had been many, many years before the site of the Carrion Night Mansion. The Lord of Midnight had happy memories of times preceding the fire that destroyed the mansion, hours when Payan had been a place of play. He'd needed no magic then. He'd been the prince, his father's favorite. That was all he had needed in order to make the world glorious and Payan a playground. But after the fire, he had never gone back. And when the man he'd thought was a harmless dreamer by the name of Rojo Pixler had offered to buy the land on which the ruins of the Night Mansion still stood, he'd readily sold it. Only later did he discover that Pixler's representatives had been surreptitiously buying up other plots of land around Payan until he had enough ground to start the construction of his dream city, a place where night was to be permanently banished by a constant blaze of artificial light. What a mockery that on the very site where the Carrion family had lived in a palace of shadow and enigma was now a garish city whose every surface blazed. The dazzle and gaud of it could be seen at midnight. If you stood in certain spots along Marrowbone's shore on the northwest, where the wind off the Isabella thinned the red fogs. Carrion had promised himself that he would personally extinguish those lights when the night of nights came, and Rojo Pixler would get a nightmare or two to replace his bright and wretched dream. Something plucked from Carrion's own cortex. Something that would leave the man a gibbering wreck, driven so far into the madness he would be unable even to remember the name of his own city. But that was for the future. Until that happy night came, it made sense to put the inventions that Pixler funded to use. Pixler was no fool. He had found a way to marry the ancient magical principles that had been practiced on the island since the beginning of time with new machineries invented by the scientists he kept in gleaming laboratories in the towers of Mexico City. Where had Pixler found those first magical principles? In books he had paid professional thieves to steal from Carrion's own library, among other places. Carrion had let it be known that he was aware of the theft and even of the price Pixler had paid the thief, a fellow by the name of John Mischief, for his illicit services. Word had later reached him that Pixler, who was at heart a superstitious man, had become very agitated when he heard that his commissioned thefts were no secret. Fearing reprisal, he had casually offered the use of his sublime verities, as he called his marriage of science and magic, to Carrion should he ever have need of them. Well, that time had come. Immediately following his interrogation of Shape, Carrion had sent one of his trusted lieutenants, Otto Houlihan, the crisscross man, to Mexico City. He was sent with a very special demand. He knew for a fact that, like any man of power, especially one who had risen suddenly like Pixler, the king of Mexico City, was not only superstitious, but paranoid. He feared for his life and for his city, and with reason. No doubt there were people on every island who hated Mexico City and all that it represented. Being a practical man, a man who believed in finding solutions, not simply stewing in his fear, Pixler had instructed his magical scientists to use their sublime verities in the creation of spies that would take the shape of living things and would be dispersed through the islands to watch for and report any sign of rebellion against him. Only a month before, the crisscross man had brought a dozen of these automaton spies to the 12th tower for the Lord of Midnight's amusement. They were like exquisite toys to Carrion's eye. He had amused himself by having Houlihan blindfold them, then watch them batter themselves to pieces against the walls of his screening room. Some of the finest he had turned over to his own scientist for closer analysis. One, an artificial Meckel bird, he had caged and kept for himself, because it needed no nourishment and it sang so fetchingly even when blinded. Now, he had a new reason for Rojo Pixler's spying operations. He wanted to know if the girl who'd apparently been Mischief's accomplice had survived the waters of the Isabella, and if so, where she'd gone. So he sent Houlihan to Mexico City. A short while later, the man returned not with information, but with one of Pixler's chief scientists, a certain Dr. Vorzangler. The doctor appeared before Carrion dressed in a fine white linen suit, with white shoes and white tie. He wore one of the more peculiar ocular devices Carrion had ever seen. It had the effect of taking the image of his eyes and superimposing them one over the other in the middle of his face. Vorzangler's eyes were not a perfect match. One of them was a little bigger than the other, and one seemed to be a little slower in its motion than its companion. So the cycloptic eye the device created was seldom whole. One image was always trailing, half an eye behind the other. Whatever the reason for his wearing it, the thing didn't seem to impair Vorzangler's vision. He was studying the paintings on the walls of the gallery when Carrion came in. His voice, when he spoke, was high-pitched and weaselly. "I hear," he said, "that you are searching for somebody. Is that right? Somebody who has conspired against you, and you need Mr. Pixler's assistance?" Before Carrion could reply, the doctor continued, his voice, after a few sentences, already annoying Carrion. "Mr. Pixler instructed me to tell you that he is more than happy to help a friend and a neighbor. Could you perhaps supply me with a brief description of this miscreant?" "No," said Carrion, "but I have somebody who can." He turned to Houlihan. "Where's Shape?" "I brought him up from the kitchens as you instructed, sir. He's waiting in the next room." "Fetch him." While Houlihan went off down the length of the gallery to fetch Shape, Carrion turned his full attention to Vorzangler. "So, what have you brought to impress me with?" he said. Vorzangler began to blink his 1.5 eyes vigorously. "It was Mr. Pixler's desire that you be given access to our most secret spying device," he said, "the Universal Eye." "I'm honored," Carrion replied. "May I ask why, if it is so secret, that Mr. Pixler so honors me?" "He looks to the future, Lord Carrion. He sees a time when, if I may be so bold, you and he may be more than distant neighbors." "Ah," said Carrion. "Good. Then let me see what proof of his intentions he has sent." "Here," Vorzangler said, bringing Carrion's attention to a dark gray box, about 3 feet square, which was standing a little way down the gallery. He took a small control unit out from his white jacket and touched it with his thumb. The response from the box was instantaneous. It rose into the air on a quintet of delicate legs on which it had been squatting. Then, without any further instruction from Vorzangler, it began to open up like a geometric flower, so that it now presented 16 screens, 4 facing each wall of the room. An instant later, they all flickered into life, the images bright. Carrion smiled. "Well, well, well," he said. He started to move around the other side of the device, but as he did so, it accommodated him by flipping around, so as to present him with 4 more screens. Some of the images were static, but more were moving, their motion sometimes chaotic, as the camera, wherever it was situated, went in pursuit of a particular suspect. By now, Houlihan had brought Shape in. He was still wearing the same shabby coat, except that it now was decorated with the remains of his meal in the kitchens. He looked embarrassed when Carrion called him to hobble forward and view the multiplicity of screens. I'm hoping we're going to find our little candy somewhere here, Carrion said to him. He turned to Vorzangler. What kind of creatures do this spying for you? He asked. You saw some of them yourself, sir, a month ago. His cycloptic gaze became sly. I believe you still keep the Meckel bird in your private rooms. The meaning of this remark was not lost on Carrion. Vorzangler was subtly telling him that even he, the Lord of Midnight, was spied upon. Carrion filed the information away for another time, and simply pretended not to understand what he'd been told. How many reports do you have in this device? He asked. 19,412, Vorzangler replied, and that's just from the last 2 days. Of course, if you want to go back further... No, said Carrion. 2 days is fine. Shape? Yes, Lord? Dr. Vorzangler is going to show you a lot of pictures. If the girl is among them, I want to know. Otto, come and find me when you're ready. Carrion left them to it and went out into the midnight, his thoughts staying from Vorzangler's sublime verities to subjects more massive and remote. It was the stars glimmering through the fog that were the present subject of his meditations. He knew from his books that each one of those distant lights was a sun unto itself, and though their meager illumination did not disturb him, there were other creatures in the Abarat for which those little stars, not to mention the brightness of the noonday sun or the light of the pallid moons that hung over the islands, were a curse. They were called the Requiacs, these creatures, and their home was in the deepest trenches of the Sea of Isabella. Their age and their capacity for evil were both beyond calculation. Such indeed was the scale of their wickedness and the extent of their age, that many learned men and women who'd made it their business to study the innumerable life forms of the Abarat did not even believe they existed. Wickedness of such proportions was a mythic invention, they said. The Requiacs could not be real. But Carrion had it from a trustworthy source that the Requiacs lived. And having that certain knowledge, he had wondered many times how things would be for his enemies across the archipelago if the light of the sun, moon, and stars were somehow to be blotted out for a little while. In that time, would the Requiacs not rise up from their unfathomable trenches, forsaking the temples where they were still paid homage by the blind monsters of the deep, and turn their vast, depraved faces towards the lightless sky? Rise up and come where they had not ventured since the time when great clouds of ash had covered the sun and moon and stars? What harm would they do if they walked the islands again? What cities would they bring down? What peoples would they erase? It was beyond even Carrion's power to fully conceive of the devastation they would unleash. But he knew one thing. He wanted to be there to witness it, and he wanted to be ready when the hour of darkness passed, and the Requiacs returned to their temples and their trenches, ready with his masons and his priests to lay down the foundations of a new world and rebuild it in his image. Lord? The voice that had disturbed his thoughts was not that of Houlihan as he'd expected. It was one of his grandmother's many stitchlings, creatures sewn together from skin and leather and fabric and then filled with a living mud. This particular stitchling was called Notcheck, and he was a wretched piece of work in every way. What is it? Carrion said to him. Your grandmother, Mater Motley, summons you, my lord. She needs to talk with you about the visitation you have had from Mexico City. She misses nothing, does she? Carrion remarked. Little, my lord, Notcheck agreed. Well, I cannot come now, Carrion told the stitchling. I have too much urgent business. She told me, Notcheck was getting nervous. Plainly, this was not a message that he wished to deliver. Go on, Carrion said. She says she forbids any further presence on Gorgasium of visitors from Mexico. She forbids? Carrion said. There was a menacing undertow to his voice. The nightmares in the water around his head grew agitated. She forbids me, that harridan, that seamstress. He caught Notcheck with one backhand sweep of his gloved hand, so powerful it threw the stitchling 10 yards. Go back to her, Carrion shouted, and you tell her, if she ever forbids me anything ever again, I will loose a pack of nightmares among her little tribe of stitchlings and drive them to tear down the 13th tower till there is nothing left but a heap of rubble. Do I make myself clear? And here is a picture of Notcheck. Woohoo! Good looking guy, huh? As he spoke, he moved towards Notcheck, as though to strike him again. The stitchling drew itself up into a little ball of terror and waited to be brutalized. But the blow never fell. Houlihan had emerged from the gallery smiling. She's found, he exclaimed. Carrion waved Notcheck away. Go tell her, he said. Notcheck fled into the crimson mist and was gone. A problem, sir, Houlihan said. Only my grandmother. She has too many fancy ideas about herself. One of these days she's going to go too far. So, you say you found her. Show me. Houlihan led Carrion back inside. The same image was now playing on all 16 screens of Vorzangler's device. The white-suited Cyclops had a smug smile on his face. She was in the Yebidim Day, in a house down on Crux Street, which is in the fisherman's ghetto. I must say, my lord, I can't see why you would have any interest in her. She doesn't look like much. I'll be the judge of that, Carrion said. He approached the screens. The images before him were crystal clear. There was the girl staring straight at the eyes of the spy, which moved to keep her centered and focused whenever she turned or backed away. Carrion turned to Mendelssohn Shape. Are you absolutely sure that this is the girl who was with Mischief? Shape nodded. No doubt? No, Lord, none. Carrion returned his gaze to the screens. So, he said quietly, staring at the girl, who are you? He continued to stare at the image for several seconds, as though his eyes were attempting to interrogate the screen. Then he glanced around at Vorzangler. When did this happen? 3 hours ago, maybe 4. So she's probably still in the Yebidim Day. What do you think, Otto? There have been some troubles there. Oops, nope. There have been some troubles there, Vorzangler said, before Houlihan had a chance to respond. The dock collapsed, so there have been no boats getting out these last couple of hours. So she is still there, Houlihan said. What's the big deal? Vorzangler said. She's just... Carrion suddenly raised his finger to silence the doctor and stared with renewed intensity at the image on the screens. The stranger from the hereafter had become angry, and her face, recorded by the very thing that was irritating her, had changed. The girlishness had gone out of it. A young woman had been ignited by the fury she felt. The change had Carrion entranced. Now what is this? He said, so softly. He narrowed his eyes, taking off his glove and putting his naked hand on one of the screens, as if wishing he could reach into it and seize hold of the girl herself. Do I know you? He said, his voice even more mellifluous. I don't, do I? The screen suddenly went blank. Carrion let out a little sob of pain, as though he'd been woken from a trance. It ends there, Vorzangler said. Carrion didn't speak for a long while. He simply continued to stare at the blank screen with an expression of profound bemusement on his face. Vorzangler opened his mouth to speak again, but Houlihan hushed him with a sharp look. Finally, after fully 2 minutes, Carrion said, Shape? Yes, Lord? Go to Vesper's Rock and wait for me there. Am I to go after the girl? Oh, yes. You are to go after her, but not by glyph. I'm going to give you something, a little more in keeping with the significance of your mission. I don't understand. Just go, Carrion said, still staring at the blank screen. Shape hurried away. There's something in that face, Otto, that makes me think my enemies are wilier than I suspected. They play with dreams now. Dreams? Asked the crisscross man. Yes, Otto. I have dreamed that face, that innocent face. But who? He glanced up and met Vorzangler's strange stare. Oh, are you still here? He said to the doctor. You may go. Thank Mr. Pixler for his kindness, will you? The universal eye, Vorzangler said. I have to return to Mexico City with it. No, said Carrion very plainly. I'll keep it here for now. No, you don't understand, Vorzangler said, panicking, making his words skip. The science of is of no interest to me, Vorzangler, so don't fret yourself. I won't be stealing back any of your precious verities. It's her I'm interested in, and until I have the real thing in front of me, I will keep your universal eye. It's not just, the doctor didn't get to his first reply. Carrion was on him in a heartbeat, his hands at the man's throat. Vorzangler tried to drag Carrion's huge grasp away from his windpipe, but his own thin little fingers weren't equal to the job. Carrion lifted him off the floor. His feet were dangling in the air. You were saying, Doctor, Carrion said. The life was rapidly going out of Dr. Vorzangler. His conjoined eyes were becoming glassy. His limbs were jangling as though he was having a fit. We might need Mr. Pixler's help in the future, Houlihan remarked casually. Carrion chewed on this for a moment. Then he took his hands off Vorzangler. The man dropped to a gasping, sobbing heap at the Lord of Midnight's feet. Take him outside. Houlihan hauled the doctor up and dragged him towards the door, pausing only to pluck the controls to the universal eye out of Vorzangler's pocket. Once he deposited him outside the gallery door, he returned to await Carrion's next instruction. When it came, it was simple enough. Show me the girl again, Carrion said. Then you can go. Vorzangler's device was easy to work. The image of the girl from the hereafter was soon called up onto the screen again, ready to be replayed and replayed. Arrange a glyph to take me to Vesper's Rock, Carrion said as he stared at the images of Candy. I want 5 corpses there, waiting for me, the usual place. Get some off the gallows. But they have to be old. I'm going to need dust. He stared at the screens. Dust for the girl from the hereafter, he smiled to himself. It's the least I can do. And that is the end of chapter 16. So I hope that you guys are enjoying it. I hope somebody's, listening along. This is one of my favorite stories, but it's Friday, so maybe you are out running around and having a good time. But I guess yeah, just enjoy the weekend, guys, and I look forward to meeting you back here on the fire soon, and we still got a ways to go with the book, so we will see what Carrion's going to do with all those corpses. Very mysterious. So I will see you later. Bye.